Welcome to the Putting Couch, episode 39, brought to you by Seymour Putter Company and our tour team. I'm Jim Grundberg, along with Ted Galena and Cody Hale, and our other regular contributor, Dr. Bob Winters, a great friend of Seymour and a great friend of golf. And Doctor, we've been following sort of a listener question and answer format over the last couple episodes, and we feel it's gone fantastic. And we actually put out the note that you were going to be with us this week, and wow, we got some great questions. So I think without spending more time, let's just jump right into some of the questions. And Doctor, the first question is from one of our listeners, and basically very general question: what is the true impact of confidence on the putting green? And Doctor, I know as one of the world-renowned sports psychologists out there, I know confidence is sort of a word you use a lot. So what is the impact of confidence on that putting green?
Well, Jim, it's great to be with you and Ted and Cody today. So let's talk about confidence. Where couldn't you use more confidence in any area of your life? I mean, it is the one thing, the one attribute, ingredient, trait that we're all looking for. So when you see a person who is on the putting green and they're putting with confidence, you see a different walk, a different swagger. I happen to believe that confidence is not just one thing, but it's a multi-dimensional amalgamation of a lot of different aspects. And I think it's psychological, I think it's emotional, I think it's physical, and I think it's even visceral. And what I mean by visceral is that, when you step into a putt with confidence, you have this internal guttural feeling that you're going to make this putt. And, I think that's really what we're all looking for, is that, that's the feeling of confidence that we want to have.
Well, that's tremendous. And you're right. Confidence really is something that, if we're not doing anything with confidence, we're not going to do it well. And before we, just to expand on that, I'm going to throw a good friend of mine under the bus right here, Doc, because I had a good friend of mine come up here a couple days ago, and very, very avid club level golfer, fantastic friend of the company. And, but like a lot of golfers, he is, his passion it runs deep, but he's got another profession in which he's one of the best in the world at. And so as much as he thinks he plays golf, he doesn't play golf that much. Let's be honest, right? A couple times a week, maybe goes out and practices every once in a while. So left here, loves, and has a bevy of Seymour putters because he loves the brand. He loves it. He's had all of his best rounds with it. But at the same time, his desire is to always find something else out there, right? And so came in here, found something, went out on the weekend for, 2-3 hours and called me up exasperated. I think I made a mistake. This might not be the right one. And all I could think of is that from a confidence perspective, what is he really giving anything a chance, expecting those types of immediate results and then getting frustrated so quickly. But I think that's what a lot of golfers do. And I suspect that maybe also ties back to confidence or expectations.
Well, I think so. Give me a great story here. Years ago, one of the first books that I read as a young golfer was My Game and Yours by Arnold Palmer. And when he got to the chapter on putting, it was just absolute conviction that I was going to make putts. I'm going to make every putt I look at. Then as the years went on, he had written another book called Situation Golf. He goes, now there's some putts you really believe you can make and some putts that you can't. And then years later, he wrote the complete book of putting with Peter Dobereiner. And it was one chapter in there. He says, my love-hate affair with 3,450 putters. And so that's what happens. You get into this golden theory, and we're always looking for something new.
Yeah.
We're always looking something from the outside. And I love what Lee Trevino said about the golden putter theory. He goes, you go into a shop, like Seymour, you pull one out, and you actually go putt with it. And you go, wow, this is the answer. You don't have any negative bias, any scar tissue with it. And you just go out there and start making everything. And then about a couple of weeks later, it's just, you don't make anything with it. And Lee Trevino said it best. He said, listen, he goes, it's not the putter, it's just getting to know you a little bit. So I thought that was a great analogy, from Lee Buck Trevino. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. Well, I mean, tied in with that is of course, I mean, people want to make more putts and I know you're a huge believer in, having that mindset that you can make every putt is makeable and what have you. But, we've had a lot of listeners say, what really derails them from a mental perspective and a confidence perspective is missing a short putt or a couple of short putts or a bunch of short putts or whatever. And I mean, hey, this happens on every single level. I mean, we follow the tour very, very closely around here. And I mean, oftentimes you'll have a PGA Tour player. You're not watching them on TV that week when they're missing a bunch of 3-foot putts. But trust me, there are a lot of guys in every field at every PGA Tour event. It becomes contagious missing those short putts. So what can a person do to get over missing a short putt to make sure that it doesn't mentally shake them later on?
Well, I think the first thing, you have to have a philosophy that every putt can be made and every putt deserves to be made. However, also one of my 10 mental rules for great putting is that, and it's number 10, is that great putters miss putts. Great putters 3-putt. I mean, let's think about, we're coming up to the Masters. The great Seve Ballesteros, after he 4-putted number 16 right there at Rosebud, and he 4-putted from 6 feet. And they asked him in the press conference, they said, how did you miss? How did you 4-putt from 6 feet? And Seve goes, well, the first one, I miss. The second one, I miss. The third one, I miss. The fourth one goes in the hole. And the point being is, in a drive, we can get away with it. We can hit an approach shot. If we don't, make the green, we can actually, chip it up and in or get it close. But when we have a 5-footer or less, there's no walk away. There's nothing that you can actually take back. You can't make up for that miss. And that's why putting, it is the final act on every hole, every round, every tournament. And I remember, my friend Tony Jacklin said that's one of the things that really just got to him, is that at the end of every hole, you're going to have to be putting. And he said there's so much expectation, so much pressure, and it wears you down. And I think that's the whole point. So in regards to your question, and we'll get back to this, a 2 to 3 footer, they, deserve to be made, but many times they will be missed because we're over trying, over controlling, and over careful. And I know, Cody, in your playing career, you've seen a lot of that.
No question. And I think we put so much of an expectation on that it has to be made. It's like, myself included, players out there, I know, at the club level all the way up to the professional level that we'll see at Bay Hill this week, we get into a situation and we get a little bit of we get tense because we're expecting to make that putt. And while it can be made, we just put all that pressure on ourselves. And I think that's where a lot of the, we're seeing, those guys that miss those 2 or 3 footers, they don't let that go. You're going to, like you said, you're going to miss them. The great players in the world miss them. So how do players get over that when they get up on the next putt? What should they do?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do, you have to realize that you weren't trying to miss that putt. But there's something in the research psychology, especially finance literature, that talks about loss aversion. Loss aversion is a financial term that means I feel twice as bad losing $100 as I feel the enjoyment of making $100. So we have to ask people, are you putting not to miss, or are you putting to make the putt? And that's the big difference. A lot of people, are putting not to miss versus putting to make. And I think that's just the key philosophy of building confidence.
Doc, I think a lot of our listeners, especially our higher handicappers, one of their goals during a round of golf is limit the number of 3-putts. And, that thought of when you're walking up to the green or they're walking up to the green and they have a, 20, 25-foot putt, they know for the most part they're not going to make it. But they also have probably in the back of their mind, man, I sure hope I get it close enough to where I don't have to have a putt where, it's sort of a little meat left on the bone. It's, I feel like I have to get it real close. How do you go about that thought process of let's just make a good solid putt and it ends up where it is, and, we go from there for our second putt, not being afraid to make a 3-putt?
Well, let's just, go back to, the tour level. Back in 2004 to 2009, two researchers from the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania, they looked at 2.5 million putts made on the PGA Tour. And they were looking at difference of birdie putts versus par putts. And what these two researchers, Pope and Schweitzer, came up with is that even the tour pros have this avoidance bias. They don't really want to run that birdie, putt past the hole because they want to have, a little, 6-incher, to come back. No one wants to face that 3-footer come backer. So what you have to do, you have to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to give this putt the very best effort, distance control, speed judgment, and I'm going to trust my hit here. And a lot of people always talk about this dictum of the 3-foot circle. And I always thought that was a little bit lackadaisical for me. I wanted to become even more specific. So I think, for all players, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to avoid missing, or are you really giving your putt the very best chance? And I always love what Helen Alfredson told me many years ago in our first book, The Mental Art of Putting, when she said, you know what? I know that I'm going to miss putts. That's realistic. She goes, but by golly, I'm going to miss them while trying to make them. And I think for people, you just have to have this new philosophy that says, okay, missing is a part of putting. I think we need to adopt that philosophy that we're going to make a lot more if we're not afraid to miss.
Yeah, I think that's. Oh,
go ahead, Cody.
I was just going to say, I think we're talking about confidence, and we're talking about, making short putts. And one question I'd have for you, Doc, is, the tour average from 10 feet is right around 38% of a make. And then the 50% mark is like 7 feet, 10 inches, right? So tour pros out on the golf course of let's say they have 10 opportunities, are only making 3 to 4. Now, the top level putters are making more than that, obviously, but there's many of them not making that. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. We see so many golfers that they come into the studio and they expect to make, obviously on a straight control putt, they expect to make them all, which that's great, but they're putting so much pressure on themselves. And we're talking about building confidence. So before the round, when players are trying to build that confidence, would you rather see them hit a lot of putts from 10, 12 feet where they're going to see a high percentage of those miss? Or should they go out right before the round, go see themselves make a lot of 2, 3, 4 footers to help build their confidence going into the round that day?
One of the things I'm always talking about building a pre-round warm-up is not even going to a hole, just actually hitting some putts 20, 30, 40 feet to get sort of this speed, this rolling resistance feel of the green. And then if we're going to go to a hole, I want them to start at 1 foot. And people go, 1 foot? Anybody can make these. And I go, exactly. Anyone can start their day seeing, feeling, and hearing success. So that's the whole point about confidence. How are you going to create confidence? Well, you have to start with success pictures. And so I think you have to start 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, and then get comfortable. But also when you're warming up, make it real. Go through your routine. Just don't sit down and hit a ball, pull another ball over and just whack it willy-nilly. That doesn't do anything, and that doesn't transfer to a real on-course performance situation. So it's all about the process and sticking to a very fundamental, routinized process that allows you to hit the ball in your line at the desired speed. And then after that, you have to accept the result because it is what it is.
And I think one of the things you've mentioned on here one time during that session is it's always great, prior to the round, use 1 golf ball, right? So that you can see the outcome of it and sort of go ahead and get into the mindset of sort of what's going on that day versus having 3 or 4 golf balls and just raking another one and hitting that next putt. And I think that is something a lot of us could take away.
Oh, I think so. I think years ago, I was helping a lot of players at Jennings Mill Country Club, which is in Bogart, Georgia. And right by the putting green, there was a plaque, and it was honoring Vicki Getz Ackerman. And what it meant is that she and her brother, Nicky Getz, and I've known him for years, and he was playing for Clemson and tour player, and now doing some great financial and college consulting practice. They would actually practice with 1 ball. And they would actually be out there for hours and hours and hours. And I think that's really what great putters do. They love putting. And if you're going to become a great putter, you either love it or you learn to love it. And if you can't do either one of those things, this is going to be a pretty frustrating game for you. You might, want to pick up tennis, but, if you really want to get, and falling in love with your putter, that flat stick, you've really got to go out and practice purposefully on your purposeful intention. And what is that? Is to actually roll the ball into the hole.
The next question, Doc, from one of our listeners is a great one. This golfer says, it's easy for me. How do I forget about the outcome? I'm very good on the practice green, but I get jumpy on the golf course sometimes, and I know it is because I'm thinking about what happens if I miss. I don't play golf for a living, so it really doesn't matter, but it gets in my brain. I need to putt like the results don't matter.
Well, he's answered his own question, but even by reading his question, there's a lot of emotional conflict. He says, I don't play for a living, but it really doesn't matter. But hold on, it gets in my head. It really does matter. And I think, that's 99.9% of us. Why is it, that when we get out to the golf course, it matters so much? I think it's because of inculcation and repetition, and people go, hey, you got to be careful on that 2-3 footer. It counts just as much as that 250-yard drive. And we almost learn to fear, and we fear missing. And I think this whole notion about missing is really what causes a lot of people to freeze, to have really what they call the putting yips. And there's a lot of, what we call the psychological performance breakdown. We choke. And why do we choke? Because it's a fine motor perception skill. That's really what putting is. And the nerves are affected in your fine motor system. So when you're over a 2 or 3 foot putt, there's no place to retreat. There's no one to actually back you up or come in or be the designated putter for you. You have to either make it or miss. And a lot of us, agonize when we see people who are having a bad putting day. And a lot of times people look away because it becomes emotionally contagious. And nothing is more contagious than watching someone make putts and you go, wow, what's that guy, or that girl doing? And so making putts is one thing, but missing putts, and especially having that, kick in the gut when you miss that 2 and 3 footer where you thought you hit a good putt, that is really deflating. And that really takes a lot out of you. And you have to have that psychological hardiness to actually accept it and move on.
Gosh.
I've got a quick question for both of you and Cody, then I think there's a follow-up. So is one of the issues with missing a 2 to 3 foot putt that the golfer then immediately starts to try to self-correct, and knowingly or unknowingly? In other words, do they start to increase their grip pressure? Do they start to change their alignment? Is there something that snowballs when that happens?
Well, just take a look at it on TV. When you see a golfer, man or woman, miss a putt, what's the first thing they do after they hole out? They go back over, to their bag, and they're actually sitting there sort of working on their stroke or whatever. Is that just a psychological, emotional response? Is that something they do? Or are they actually really looking for something? And I think of something that Cody said earlier, is that the percentage, of these professionals making putts, and we have these high expectations because we're saying, well, we need to be making as many putts as these people do. These people are playing on the very best manicured lawns, putting greens in the world at, a very specific week when they're putting their very best. And it's just an unrealistic expectation. You're comparing apples to raisins here. So we have, different greens, bumpy greens, and we don't have the vocational choice. We're not spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day, working on our craft. We may be going out 1 or 2 days a week. So we've got to keep these expectations smart and realistic.
Cody?
Yeah, no, I think too, a lot of them, they, like we talked about, changing putters, or, they're already, if we miss a 2 foot putt, it could have, or 3 foot putt. Most of the time it's, something simple, but it could have been something as, hey, I just, didn't make a good stroke, or I was aimed properly. I didn't aim in the right position. And then we go to start we start thinking about it and trying things as, the next, like Doc said, we're over there working on our stroke versus just moving on and saying, hey, and I always relate it back. I remember Nicholas saying, somebody asked him, oh, you missed the putt on whatever hole. And he's like, oh, I never missed, I never missed any of those because I hit it exactly where I was looking. Right. So, all right, I made the stroke I was hoping to make. I trusted that. It just didn't go in. As in his mind, he made it. And so sometimes we have to tell ourselves that is like, hey, I gave myself the best opportunity. It didn't go in. We have to move on. But for a lot of us, we get such in a mindset of the next hole. We're thinking about the technical aspects of something that went wrong versus just, trying to paint that picture and then putt to it.
Absolutely. That's such a great point. Yesterday, I was at Orange Tree Golf Club, which is my private club, and I'm on the range, and was working on my game, had a little extra time. And PGA Hall of Fame member Joe Tesori from Syracuse, New York, comes up to me, and he says, Doc, he goes, I've got some great things I want to ask you. And we talked a little bit, but we started talking about putting. And he said, when I was playing, I was getting ready to go on the tour many years ago, I was playing with Mark McCumber. And he goes, and my putting was really, really nervous. I was coming down the stretch, and I was over about this 3 or 4 footer, and I was sweating bullets. And so Mark McCumber, has been a great player, won the Players Championship. He comes by and he says something to me. He goes, and I'll never forget it. And this is what Joe Tesori told me. He said, listen, just do the same thing you've been doing, 1,000 times. It's going to be over in a half a second anyway. And he said, and he just said that, and it just resonated with him. And he thought, oh, okay. And he stepped up and he went ahead and hit the putt and he made the putt. But, to what you're saying there, Cody, is that when we get this 2 and 3 foot putt, what is it that we should really be focusing on? And for all of our listeners, the one thing, and I remember the great Arnold Palmer told me, he goes, when you have to make a putt, the one thing you want to do is step over that putt. You want to get yourself nice and set, know exactly where it's going to go into the hole, and then step back and then look at that putt, get that putter head set, and then just make a good stroke and hit it solid. Because, if you hit a solid putt, that ball will go in the hole, and it's going to be over in just, a fraction of a second. And that's really what a solid hit does. It stays on its line. It's a confident hit. We talk about confident putting. A square hit, square contact, going down the line. You will make a lot of those short putts. If you just do that one thing, keep your head and your body still, step up and hit the putt solid. Center of mass on the putter face, the sweet spot, the center of mass on the golf ball. And that's really what, pure physics is all about. And putting is all about putting and gravity and physics anyway. So, let alone the psychological part. So if you do that, you've gotten a great tip, from the king himself.
I'd say the other thing is that, we talk about missing 2 to 3 feet long putts. And, in reality, a lot of golfers are probably also throwing in 4 footers and 5 footers in there because they feel like putts they should have made, right? And probably putts that they make, on the indoor putting green all day long when they're out there trying out putters. But the reality is that, every inch away from 2 feet, the putt gets more and more difficult. And on tour, every single putt is going to be some combination of your line and your speed, even on perfect greens. And most golfers are not playing on tour level greens. So they've got the line, they've got the speed, they've got the imperfections of the grass and whatever. So, 3 feet isn't just a gimme when there's a line and speed involved. So, I think one of the issues is that don't discount those putts. Those are great putts to make. It's almost like people feel like it's all downside and no upside. But, you got to give yourself a great feeling when you knock a 2 to 3 foot putt in.
Oh, absolutely. And I always remember, hearing a lot of different theorists talk about, well, the short putts are all about routine anyway. So what I try to do with my players, if you're having problems with your short putting, let's really find out how good or how ineffective you are. Let's go out, let's put 100 balls down, a 3-foot circle, and make it a flat, putting surface, but each putt you go to a different putt. How many do you make out of 100? And lo and behold, most of them make anywhere from 82 to maybe 85 out of 100. Now, they might miss 10 to 15. So I'm sitting there thinking like a foul shooter, a basketball. He goes to the free throw line. If he knows he's a 92%, foul shooter, he knows that 9 out of 10, that ball's going to go in. Same thing if you actually find out, hey, I'm like an 85%, 3-footer. I can step up. Okay, if I miss one, I'll make the next one. So we just kind of look at the science of numbers sometimes. Sometimes we let science, do the work. And we have sort of been this past year trying to follow the science, or at least that's what we've been told, to follow the science. So we can actually do that here, even in our putting research. And I always love what Albert Einstein said about research. If we knew what the heck we were doing, it wouldn't be called research, would it? So we have to go out there and do a little research for us and find out how good or how ineffective we are. And that way it would be a blind spot for us. So I think that's a couple of things that people could really help make those 2 and 3 footers.
That's awesome.
Doc, what's the percentages in your mind you think that people think if, they use the putter as the crutch when they think they're putting good, and then when they're not putting good, it's the putter and I got to go switch something else. And is that why they have 4 or 5 different putters in their closet, or how often do you think they really use that putter as, a crutch to say, okay, I'm riding it. When I'm not, it's going back in the closet.
Well, I couldn't even really fathom to guess there, Ted, but one of the things about having too many putters, my father used to tell a story. If you've got one boy or one girl painting a fence, you've got 100% productivity out of that boy or girl, right? But now you have 2. You have 2 boys or 2 girls painting that same fence. You're only getting 50% production. Then if you get 3 people, it's like 3 putters, you're only getting 33% production. You get anything more than 4, well, you've got yourself a party and you've got yourself a mess. I think sometimes, you have to have some of this common sense philosophy coming from people who aren't really the experts in the field to kind of put, perspective on all this. Because one of the things you want to do is know that sometimes a different look, the aesthetics, the feel, that might, help, refresh and energize your putting battery. But, when it comes down to tried and true, when you're really having to make putts, what do we usually do? We go back to Old Faithful. All right. That's the one that we trust. And the reason why we trust it is because we know we have seen in our visual and collective memory, we've seen putts made. And that's really what you want to go on. And I think sometimes it's okay to actually, get away. But if you really want to become a really good putter, take a look at the great putters. Even, the Brad Faxons, they may have 1 or 2 that look a little bit different, all right? But they still go back to that Old Faithful. That's the one. And if you can find that, that's the one you want to stick with, tried and true. Because as we say, it's not the arrow, it's the person, pulling that bow.
That's awesome. Well, we like to say here, this is the 39th episode of the Putting Couch, brought to you by the Seymour Putter Company's tour team. And we like to go back and using statistics as science. While we're a small, boutique niche putter company, Seymour's rifle scope technology helps golfers of all levels gain a comfort with routine and some of this stuff that gets in the way of being freed up to play the game. And 3 different players have actually led the tour over an entire season in putting, and a 4th finished 2nd on tour in putting. So just incredible. And that's not a coincidence. That's because these players have used that putter, which just over time has allowed them to get more and more consistent and comfortable with their setup. So, we think that's a big part of the mental game. I would like to finish with my little tour story from Monday. 2 of the best players, really, 2 of the best putters probably in PGA Tour history, certainly of the last 20 years, were playing together in a Pro-Am. And I talked to a caddy who was caddying for one of them, and he talked about how both of them, the thing is they've won over 20 PGA Tour events. They've won multiple majors between them, and they were having a game out there. And but his comment is that with experience, kind of, Doc, you talked about this. Both of these players are 40-ish, and he talked about the evolution of, all players. And he talked about on tour, and he said, the difference that he sees in their game is that every once in a while he feels right now like when they're putting their first putt, they're actually, like the rest of us, they're thinking about the second putt. And he said both of them, he guarantees when they were winning majors and winning tour events, literally they weren't thinking about that. Every single putt was a first putt, okay? So you got a 20-foot putt, you're trying to make it, you miss it. That next putt isn't, I don't think it's a second putt. It's just another putt in front of you that you're going to make. Whereas I think you start counting them up. And I mean, if a tour player is doing that, we know that the average player and our listeners is doing that 100 times that level, right? I mean, in your head, oh, this is my first putt. Oh, now this is my second putt. I mean, I might 4-putt. And it just seemed to me like it was definitely eye-opening that even players of that level, occasionally this comes into their heads. So, listeners, you are not alone.
And Jim, to add to that story, I mean, the Shell's Wonderful World of Golf, it had Gary Player playing Arnold Palmer. And so you had Gene Saracen, who was the moderator. And after 9 holes, both of them were like 33, shot 32. And so Gene was going to, Gary Player, he goes, boy, Gary, you really played some great, shots out there. Gary Player goes back to Gene Saracen and says, yeah, I'll tell you what, Arnie's making everything. If I'd made half the putts that Arnie did, I'd be up there beating him. On the other side of the green, it was Jimmy Demerit who was talking to Arnold. And he goes, boy, Arnold, it's a really good match with you and Gary Player. And Arnold goes, that daggone Gary's making everything, So here it is, 2 of the best players, both making a lot of putts. And it was like another dog looking at another dog's fish going, I want to have that dog's bone. And it just goes to show that the greatest players, the greatest Hall of Famers, everyone, are just like us. We think everybody else is making putts, and we're not making anything at all. And that's why this is the greatest game, physical, mental, and emotional in the whole world. And really, when it comes right down to it, it's the putting that separates, the winners from the wannabes.
What a great way to wrap it. Guys, I really appreciate you joining me again this week. And, wow, 30 minutes on a 3-foot putt. But, that's really, we went a lot of different directions. But that was fantastic. Doctor promised me that you'll be back in the rotation soon. And we'll continue to take these great questions from our listeners. So you have been listening to episode 39 of The Putting Couch. Brought to you by the Seymour Putter Company's tour team with today's special guest, one of the world's renowned sports psychologists, Dr. Bob Winters. Thank you for listening.
We appreciate you joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you do wherever you're listening. Be sure to leave a rating and review because that's how we get the Putting Couch podcast content in front of more people. Also, take a screenshot and share it on social media and tag us at Seymour Putters or #Team Seymour.